Frances Torino Bond graduated from the Maryland State Teachers College at Towson in 1955 with a bachelor's degree in early childhood education. Dr. Bond worked several years in public education. She came to the Maryland State Teachers College at Towson in 1962 and served as a Lida Lee Tall teacher, faculty member, and administrator for more than 40 years. She has also served in numerous national educational posts. These are her reflections.
Dr. Bond, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us your preparation to become a teacher at Towson University and your subsequent career in education. This will add mightily to our oral history project, which we hope will show the evolution of teaching at Towson University across time. Where we'd like to start is with your social context, if you will, where you grew up, the point in your life when you considered becoming a teacher, and your choice of Towson University.
Okay, I can remember those things, Karen. I grew up in Baltimore. I'm a Baltimorean, and I was born in Little Italy. My parents were both immigrants, Italian immigrants, and so for the first few years of my life, I went to school at St. Leo's School in Little Italy. And then when I was about 7 years old, we moved to Belair Road, which was the new suburban area, and we just thought that was a wonderful change. But I did miss Little Italy and the community there. I went to school, parochial school, all my life, Little Flower and then Catholic High. And Catholic High, of course, was an all-girls school, so there was a little difference there in the context of school. At that time, as you know, women had few choices in careers. You could be a secretary, a teacher, a nurse, or a religious. And actually, I did want to be a religious, and I wanted to be a nun. But when I graduated from high school at the age of 17, my parents asked if I would just wait until my 20s and maybe consider this and prolong going into the religious. So I agreed, and I agreed to go to college, and they were delighted. As I said, they were immigrants who did not have a high school education, so they were just thrilled that there was going to be someone in the family to get an education. My father especially, and I always say that my father, who did not go to high school, was the wisest man I ever knew. And he would say to me over and over, Francesca, get an education. They can't take that away from you. And so it was decided that I would come to State Teachers College, primarily for two reasons. The first, there was no tuition at the time, as you know, because there was a tuition waiver. If you promised to teach in Maryland for 2 years after graduation, there was no tuition. And the second reason was that it was accessible by bus and streetcar from my home, although it took over an hour to get here. So this was a good choice for me to come to Towson.
Once you arrived on campus and you got started as a student, what do you recall about your coursework here, especially your courses in education? And I guess what I'm getting at is, do you recall that that was mostly theoretical? They were theoretical in nature, or was there a practical bent to them, or maybe a combination of the two? And also, were you in schools before you did your official student teaching experience? Did you get to observe? Did you participate in any kind of way?
That's a lot to answer.
Yes.
But when I came to Towson, as I said, I had been in a parochial setting, last 4 years with all girls. So it was a bit of a culture shock. I was here with students from all over Maryland. Very different atmosphere here. And although the women outnumbered the men probably 3 to 1, there were still men on campus. That proved to be sometimes a distraction with that. I enjoyed my courses, but again, I found that in the parochial school, there was much more hand-holding in the process. Here, there were lots of lectures, lots of memorization, lots of quizzes, and so I found this to be somewhat of an adjustment that I had to go through, especially with the liberal arts courses. But I had some wonderful professors. I just had to adjust my own style of learning to the style of teaching that they proclaimed. When I began my courses in education, I knew that I had made the right selection. I knew that I wanted to be a teacher of young children and found this is my niche, this is my niche. At the time, the Lida Lee Tall Laboratory School was located in Van Bockelen, and most of the children there were children of faculty members. And so we would observe, but I don't remember participating in the classrooms as such. There were lots of observation, but not going in to do bits of lessons. We observed faculty members who taught a lesson and then brought it back to the classroom to match it with the methodology that they were trying to then kind of impart with us, so that there was that connection there. I remember seeing faculty of art and music do demonstration lessons where we could observe and see their interaction with the children. So there were lots of interactions that way, but not so much going in and getting hands-on experiences per se.
And you were going to be an elementary ed major?
Actually, early childhood
Early
education.
And were children of that age being taught in the university school as well?
Yes, there was a kindergarten program here on the university campus. And surprisingly, the only jurisdiction in Maryland that had a kindergarten was Baltimore City Public Schools in the 1950s. Huh. So I had this burning desire to be a kindergarten teacher of 5-year-olds. And so I had to then focus on Baltimore City as a place to go in order to achieve that goal.
Interesting. So when you got to student teaching, were you able to then get a student teaching experience with kindergarten, or did you teach in at a couple of different grade levels?
Yes, I did. And I had a wonderful student teaching experience, 2 actually. When I student taught, it was 1954, and it was the first year of desegregation in Maryland. And so my first school was Govins Elementary on York Road, and I had a 2nd grade there. I was partnered with a young man in the student teaching setting, so he and I were both students. And this was a little bit unheard of, that men were going into early childhood, because the early childhood program here at Towson was separate from the elementary program. In early childhood, you were then considered to be certified from grades kindergarten to 3rd grade, and elementary 1st to the 6th grade. But I wanted that kindergarten so bad that I thought, I'm not limiting myself, I do this. So I had a wonderful experience for about 6 or 7 weeks at Govins Elementary. And then I was put into a school near Patterson Park Avenue. Now, that school was integrated. When I arrived about November of that year, there were no incidents that I saw, and yet I found it surprising that there was a security guard stationed at the entrance of the school every morning and every afternoon, because this was a new concept with the integration. My kindergarten experience was very interesting. I spent long, long hours in that classroom with a super teacher, Mary Metz. And that November, Mary was to take on the lead in putting together a holiday extravaganza. So after school, we worked on scenery, we worked on costumes, we worked on music, and it was an experience till 7 or 8 o'clock at night sometime. I rode the trolley and the bus to the school near Patterson Park, but Mary was very, very good. If we worked after 7 o'clock, she would give me a ride back to campus and such. But that was a wonderful experience. And again, you know, every experience like that convinced me this is where you belong. This is what you should be doing, teaching 5-year-olds. I must say that my initial intention of becoming a nun was turned around when I met my who was my future husband here in one of the classes, in the psychology class. And Torino Bond was a year ahead of me, and that was the end of that dream and of going into the convent. But it was something that resulted in 4 wonderful, wonderful sons and 8 grandchildren. So it was a good match there, and it was a good thing that all around that worked out that way.
In your family experience, then you certainly had additional opportunity to be a teacher of young students and older students,
yes,
and even older students.
Yes,
So
and with my studying, because and as we talk about this, in my course of study, at some time in my life, I had 4 sons, 4 young sons. I was working full-time in education and going to get my PhD at College Park. And my mother was the strength of all of this in terms of taking care of the boys and helping me with that. And you know, I often think back, I didn't know my own grandparents, but my mother was the model grandmother. And I think that my skills today as a grandmother relate back to just looking at her. And my sons, my adult sons today, have such fond memories of Nonni and the things that she did for them, and her wonderful Italian cooking that I've never been able to match with that. But I think that she was a tremendous help in getting me through this time, because it was hectic. It was hectic.
To say the least, I can't imagine. Very busy.
But it showed, you know, I think, and I was saying this recently to someone, my going on to school, my studying, my saying to the children, I have to do homework, I have to study, I think that set an example for them, because I was very fortunate, I am very fortunate that all of my sons were good learners, went on to get wonderful degrees, and I hope that, you know, I was a bit of a model for that.
It certainly sounds like that. Absolutely.
And when they were getting their master's degree and they would complain about, oh, I have so much work to do, I said, tell me about it, you know. Tell me about when that was. You know, I can remember those days with that.
You can silence some of that complaining in a hurry.
Right.
My heavens.
Yes.
You were a hard role model to follow.
Yes. Well, I don't know about that, but they were very much a part of not only my education, but my work here at Towson. I mean, it was not unusual to see them on campus. They attended Lida Lee Tall, they attended the summer programs here, they attended the sports program, so they were very much a part of this. However, the downside of that was when they had to select a college, they felt they didn't want to come to Towson because, you know, oh, we went there as, you know, But one of my sons did graduate from Towson, and it was wonderful.
Well, let's go back to the point in time when you were completing that student teaching experience and you're loving kindergarten, and I guess second grade was okay.
Yes.
And at that point, how are you feeling about becoming a teacher? You had said earlier that you thought perhaps that this was your true calling. Did you have that sense of confidence about that choice?
Absolutely, I did. And my supervisor at that time, my college supervisor, Zenith Veely, was a wonderful mentor to me, and she gave me all kinds of encouragement and lavish praise and such. So I applied for a position in Baltimore City Public Schools because I wanted that kindergarten. And you were required to take what was known as a placement test prior to being put on a list for employment in Baltimore City. Yes.
I didn't know that.
I remember taking a placement test, and then I was told, although I have to say this was never verified, although I suspect that it is somewhat true, that you were then placed on a list according to the results of the placement test, your GPA, and your grades in student teaching. Now, at that time, of course, there were grades given for both experiences along with a write-up, and I think somewhere along the line then, the grades for student teaching fell off. But so I was given this position at Brems Lane Elementary School in Baltimore City. And the irony of it was that the school was directly across the street from my parents' home, the home where I grew up. But yet I had never set foot in that school in all my years because I had been in parochial school. Right. But I had, you know, observed the school and looked at the teachers, and I was just so excited to get this position. And then as I said, my parents living right across the street. So my first year of teaching, they had an abundance of children, of 5-year-olds, and so they had 3 teachers and 2 classrooms. And I was the low man on the totem pole, so I was the floater. And that meant that I went from classroom to classroom throughout the day when the other teachers might be outside or in the gym. And then there was a closet, really a closet that I took this group of 25 and 30 children in the morning and in the afternoon. But I survived that first year, and I survived it very well. The second year, I was given my own classroom. And it was unbelievable. It was a large room with a fireplace, a rocking chair, a puppet stage, hardwood floors. I mean, you know, I just thought, oh, I've died and gone to heaven. This is absolutely wonderful. And my principal, Mrs. Webster, Naomi Webster, was a graduate of Towson. And she was, again, a wonderful mentor to me. That second year, I became a demonstration teacher. And in Baltimore City, this meant that early childhood teachers would come to observe you teach, and then following the observation, there would be a discussion about the lesson. So I was an observation for Baltimore City teachers, and also for pediatric nurses from Union Memorial Hospital. They would come over and observe the interactions that I had with the children, and we would talk about their relationship with children and that.
Isn't that something?
Oh, so it was just wonderful. It was a wonderful experience for that. And then following that, then I guess in late 1957, I had my first son, William.
Did you get married right out of
Yes,
college?
right out. You know, graduated in June, married in August. That was, you know, that was the norm.
Expected.
If you didn't, yes, you know, it was almost like You meet a man in your first year, you get you go steady the second year, become engaged in your third year, and then get
Marry in
yes.
the end of your fourth.
Then that was the thing to do. But
So after 2 years.
my son was born, and then I stayed home with him. But during that time, Towson was initiating a master's program. So I thought, well, this is what I'll do. I'll busy myself, get my master's. And I was in that first class of people studying for their master's, and got my master's in elementary ed and psychology, and worked with such wonderful, wonderful people at that time. And as you know, that there were 8 graduates of that master's class, the first graduating class in 1960. And because my name began with B, I was the first one to walk across the stage. So I was given the title of the first graduate of the master's program in education. A few years ago, Towson celebrated 50-year anniversary of that event. And I was very fortunate to be asked to speak at that event. And it was wonderful to go back and reminisce about those years in the graduate program. And of course, my children and my grandchildren became very much tuned in to this. And I like to tell the story of one of my grandsons who wrote an essay about his, and he must have been about 9 or 10, about his grandmother, who was the first graduate of Towson. And the teacher said, "I don't think so, Michael. I think that your grandmother's not that old." And he said, yes, here's a picture. And then he brought in a picture of her, and there was no more discussion. And I don't know if she realized that I was not the first graduate, or from the picture she wasn't sure whether she could make that distinction with that. But
it wasn't. It was no longer an issue.
No. But
however, it was resolved.
And I sometimes laugh because I think, that's my claim to fame. This first graduate of Towson University. Not really.
Not quite. No, I don't think so.
No.
So you stayed home and got your master's degree, and how?
And then I went back to Brems Lane and taught second grade. And it was very convenient, of course, my mother living right across the street from the school. And so she took care of Bill. And I would even run home because I had some lunchtime experience, and so I'd run home to see Bill or whatever. So it was a wonderful arrangement, to have them. But then in 1962, in the summer of '62, I received a phone call from Maud Broyles, who was in the education department, and she asked if I would like to interview for a position in the Lida Lee Tall School. And I call that my dream phone call, to be invited back on campus where you had these wonderful experiences, to work with children in a kindergarten there. So I came to the interview in my hat and my gloves in the heat of the summer and in my suit, and met with the faculty and some faculty of Lida Lee Tall, along with some education faculty. And I was offered a position, and it was a part-time position in the morning, teaching kindergarten. And I just jumped at the opportunity. And again, most of the children were children of faculty members, but it was a wonderful program because of the principal, Genevieve Hegney. She was so brilliant and so soft-spoken and such a mentor to me. And she was the one who encouraged me to go on to get further education. She was a graduate of Teachers College, Columbia. And her faculty meetings were like a college course. I learned so much from her. And the other kindergarten teacher at the time was Alice Holden, who became a very close friend and a colleague to me. And we had wonderful experiences in that kindergarten.
Now, kindergarten was half a day.
Yes. And so,
was it required at that point?
No, it was not. It was not required. And as I said, I don't think that kindergarten came into the requirement stage until probably in the 60s. So it was, you know, an innovative program. And
Sure.
it was what I believe how young children learn, you know, through play, through experiences, through conversation, through literacy, through books. That's, you know, that was all the ways that we taught. The second year that I was there, though, I received a visit, and I can't remember who it was, but I remember they came to the classroom, and they invited me to teach kindergarten in the morning, and then to supervise student teachers, early childhood student teachers, in the afternoon. And I would be supervising primarily in the Baltimore City schools, because I'd be primarily supervising the kindergarten and first and second grades.
Right.
So again, there was this wonderful opportunity, just dropped right into my lap, and I was very pleased. I did this for, I guess about 4 years or 5 years. And one year stands out in my mind. That year there was a preponderance of boys that had enrolled in the kindergarten. And they weren't quite sure how they were going to separate the children into these two kindergarten classes. And so they decided that maybe one class should be all boys and the other class the mixed group. And they asked me if I would be willing to take the all-boy group. And I said, yes, I would. And it was a fascinating year, and we did some research, some studies on that about gearing our curriculum to how young boys learn, you know, the language part. And at that time, there was a lot of construction going on campus. And so it was perfect to bring the boys up to see the construction, to go back and to write about it and to read about it. And we found that on the readiness test that year, that the boys excelled in their test scores because the curriculum was very much focused to their needs and their interests, and it was an outstanding year for me that I had with that.
Now, did you just have Bill at that point, or?
No, I had, let's see, I guess I had 3 children at that point.
Heavens.
Yes.
All boys.
All boys, 3 children. So I was using skills both at home and in the classroom dealing with the boys and such. And again, my own sons would come over to Lida Lee Tall. By that time, we had moved to the wonderful new building. And my own boys would come over to Lida Lee Tall, and they would, on Saturday or Sunday if I were working there, and Lida Lee Tall had a ramp that went from the top to the bottom, and the bottom was the kindergarten. And they had wonderful experiences there. And as I said, they attended Lida Lee Tall in the summer, and James then, who came along last, attended in the regular school year too.
So here we are. We're at the point now where you are doing half-day kindergarten and you are supervising student teachers. How was that experience, the supervision piece?
It was very good, and you know, today, I mean, as of now, I still supervise students in the classroom.
Right.
And I love that. I love doing that because it gives me a kind of what I think the best of 2 worlds. I get to see the children in action, and then I get to see the students interacting with them. And it's always, sometimes I feel kind of bad. I sit in the back of the room and you can see, you know, everything that should be going on, but if you're there in the moment, it's a little more difficult to teach that. But I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed being with the students, being with adults, and to be with children. So I thought that that was a wonderful opportunity for me. But then I was invited to come into the education department full-time. And with that, I taught graduate and undergraduate courses, and later became chairperson of the early childhood department. Mm-hmm. And spent 1 year in the student teaching office, and that was called the Applied Skills in Education at that time. And then 14 years as Associate Dean in the College of Education with Dr. Binko. And Jim Binko and I, again, he was absolutely wonderful to work with, and I believe we really complemented one another in our skills and such, and it was, again, a wonderful time in my life to do this.
When you were chair, so now you've made the shift to completely really higher ed, although you're still certainly connected with public education.
Mm-hmm.
It's pre-K 12 now, or at least pre-K 3, which I guess that's what early childhood was at the time. What were you involved in as chair of early childhood? And I know that this is an area that and an age level that you have worked with over time. How was that department evolving and preparation for folks who wanted to work with children of that age while you were chair?
Yes, it was evolving, and one of the initiatives that we did was that we invited a faculty member in the early childhood department to spend a year teaching in Lida Lee Tall to make that exchange, so that a Lida Lee Tall faculty member would come up and be a member of the department, and the department member would go down there, so that they didn't lose their connection with children and actually in the classroom. So, so that was one of the things we did. We were very tuned in to what was happening in terms of curriculum for young children. Mm-hmm. And by that time, kindergarten was becoming more universal across the globe, and also in Maryland. So we were having more teachers to prepare because they were having more opportunities to go out there and to teach. So this made a difference too in our numbers. I remember one year, and I probably am the only person on this campus who remembers this, but Middle States came to do an accreditation for us. And in their exit interview, they cited early childhood education as an exemplary program, a small program, but exemplary program, and one that other departments should look at in terms of its management. Well, again, you know, this was, and as I said, probably no one else remembers that, but I remember that, and I remember seeing it in the report, and it was a big deal, you know.
It's a big deal.
And I must say that the faculty of the early childhood department were wonderful, outstanding, dedicated people. I can remember every one of them with their strengths, and we had literacy days, we had children's literature days, we put on early childhood conference that brought in people from all over the state. We had leading speakers at these conferences, David Elkind, Brazelton. We did things that I think were innovative and daring in a small department, but because people worked together and just felt so good about accomplishing these things, we were able to accomplish them. So it was, again, a wonderful time in my life.
Well, you certainly sound like you've had a number of those.
I do.
And opportunities have just sort of presented themselves.
Yes, and sometimes I think, you know, I was in the right place at the right time or whatever in terms of this. And then every opportunity was kind of a step, although sometimes as I thought about this, and I've given lots of speeches on early childhood education and parenting, and I often say, you know, through the years, I started out in kindergarten and went to chairperson of the department and then associate dean. But I'm not sure if that career ladder went up or down, you know, because that experience there with the 5-year-olds was the one that just kind of brought it all together and was the most exciting. And I'm not sure I could have gone any higher than that.
That's very nice.
So.
Very nice. But you did move on to the associate dean position. And tell us a little bit about what that entailed and how you remained to some extent connected with teacher education, whether that was being responsible for accreditation or curriculum development, whatever.
And I still continue to teach at least 1 or 2 courses in there, so I didn't lose that contact with the students. And I was involved in accreditation and articulation with the community colleges. That was a big initiative of mine, to go out to the community colleges and make some articulation agreement where the community college graduates could come into the early childhood department and it would be a seamless transition. So that was something that I worked on. I worked on some independent study courses for the first time. There were a couple of courses that I developed that were independent study, and we did kind of a pilot for that, and they were very successful. I worked with the Maryland State Department of Education in kind of coordinating the education around the deans and directors from colleges across the state so that we had kind of the same agenda. And there were always issues, of course, that came up in terms of teacher education or early childhood education. And I was the representative from the education department to meet with the deans and directors and the Department of Education to discuss these and to make some real inroads into the teacher education programs and what they should look like and how they best would suit people with that. So there were lots of things going on. Another thing that I worked on was connection with alumni at that time. And we developed and I want to say College of Education, and I'm not sure it was a college at that point, but we worked with forming a council for alumni, and we met regularly with that. And we had some wonderful, prestigious alumni on that. And I put together an alumni bulletin called The Update, and we would talk about the education department, and that went out to lots of alumni from education, of course. So we wanted that connection. We wanted the feedback from alumni, and that was a big part of that. And then I also worked on surveys for our graduates, you know, so we could tell, or they could tell us 1 year out, 3 years out, 5 years out, what did we do well, what do we need to do, and that. So I did a lot of work with the surveys and working with our graduates.
Do you remember what their response was in sort of broad strokes?
Yes, I do. Because I was thinking about this when I was thinking about teacher education. And very often, the teacher education students will have a course during their preparation time. But it doesn't really gel until they are out in the classroom. And you know what an example of this is: classroom management, because invariably 80% of, I can remember 80% of the questionnaires would say, we need a course in classroom management. And oftentimes, in fact, a couple of years, I taught a course in classroom management, and I'd say, oh, where were you? I was teaching this. But it doesn't gel till they get out there and face that on a day-to-day basis and making a difference from that. But
well, and I think possibly that's in part because classrooms are fairly well established by the time student teachers come in to do their thing.
right.
So they haven't actually been the person who's done all that groundwork and getting the class set up and classroom procedure defined.
Yes.
And so, but it is funny that they wouldn't understand its relevance at that point.
Yes, I mean, it's when they step into the classroom and have to manage it on their own that they begin to realize, what was it, or did they, what did they say, or such, you know.
Now,
But
what
the
am I supposed to do?
questionnaire was very helpful, and of course I think that was required by NCATE at that time. So we followed through on that.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
As you look back at your work at Towson as the Associate Dean and before that, you were taking away an enormous understanding of teacher education. And I'm just, and we'll talk a little bit later about where you went after the Associate Dean position, because you certainly didn't stand still for an absolute nanosecond. But sort of reflecting back at that part of your professional life, what were you seeing as critical elements in teacher education? I mean, you've been a chair, you've done an accreditation, you did the surveys. If you were to sort of reflect back on essential elements for a teacher preparation, what are, and I don't mean for you to belabor this, but what did you just sense, or your aha, or your well-considered whatever thoughts about that?
Well, I think in reflecting on this, I believe that not everyone who wants to be a teacher should be a teacher. I think that there's a wide gap between the ideal of teaching and the realities of a classroom. You know, it may sound, you know, that this is glamorous, whatever. And teaching is like no other profession, because as a teacher, you have so many roles that you play. You impart information, you're a disciplinarian, you're a communicator, you're an arbitrator, you're a role model, you're a team member, and sometimes you're a surrogate parent. So, I mean, these are a lot of roles. And how does a teacher preparation program then prepare someone for all of these roles? And I believe that they can do this in several ways. They provide the skill, they provide the knowledge, they provide help with the disposition, and they also provide lots of clinical experiences. Because I find that the clinical experiences sometimes then has the person make that distinction between the ideal and the real. And so they almost self-select. You know, they're in the classroom and they say, this is not for me. And that's the best kind of selection we can have, because it's very difficult. And there were times as Associate Dean when I felt that this student was not cut out to be a teacher. They were a wonderful person. They would have made, you know, beautiful music or whatever, but it was just not there for teaching. And I had to have them decide this on their own. And so I guided them through clinical experiences in other ways. But I think the teacher education programs can lay the foundation for all of this. The knowledge, the skills, the clinician part of it. And that foundation has to be strong. It has to be well grounded. But it's not until the student goes into the classroom with that strong foundation that they're able to take this to the next level of competency in being a teacher. They build on that.
Mm-hmm.
Teacher education programs, no matter how complete they may be, how thorough they may be, can't do it all.
Right.
We can give them the foundation, a strong foundation. We can help them to build on that, but it's when you're in the classroom that the reality goes in. You know, sometimes I guess as I sit and look at students, I judge their competency on the answer to one question, and that is, would I want this teacher teaching my grandchildren?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the measure,
Right.
you know, for is this going to be a person who's going to make it in terms of this world. Teaching is very different today than it was 50 years ago. And we have to prepare our students for these differences in the culture, in the realm of working with parents, all of these things. We can't do it all, but we can have a good basis for the foundation for that, so that when they go out, they do feel confident and they can, you know, achieve these things.
And certainly continue to build
Yes.
those things professionally. I mean, you can't be perfectly formed without being in the classroom and having that experience, as you said.
Yes, and I remember again when I was associate dean, we did have what I like to call kind of a first-year program where students who were first-year teachers then, that we contacted them as faculty. We contacted them. How's this year going? What can we do to help you? We had them on campus often during their first year. Many times, and I think the school systems really are doing a better job of this now in terms of the working with new teachers. But there were times when the new teachers were given the least satisfactory positions. And so we invited them on campus during their first year. We talked to them. We followed up with them. And I just thought this was, again, a wonderful program that would help them to become successful or to continue their success in the classroom.
Well, I think now in service, professional development
Yes.
has become
Oh,
a big piece of that follow-up.
yes, and I
for
mean, I think
teachers.
people recognize this. You know, you
Yes.
can't just, you know, take a first-year teacher and have them on their own. I mean, we looked at the statistics of the teacher retention, and it was very poor, and I think people realized we weren't doing enough to ensure their success and in order to keep them in the classroom. No.
One thing that it's sort of happening concurrently with, and actually very much a part of your professional development and career, is that you are working on a doctorate. So at some point in your life, you made a commitment to start that process. When did you start that work? Was
Well-
that when you were chair or when you were a faculty member?
I believe I was a chair when I decided to do that. And there were a couple of things that led me to that. And one was, I guess, the realization that if I wanted to stay in academics, I needed to go on. And that there were, as I said, wonderful mentors in my life that encouraged me to do this. I had some doubts about this because of the children and working, and I went through a couple of years where my husband was very ill, And so we had that that had to be dealt with. But again, my mother was absolutely wonderful during that time. But because I couldn't travel to Columbia University, that would have been, ideal. The University of Maryland at College Park had a program, and although many people from Baltimore County that I knew were taking programs in leadership or administration, I chose a program in human development because I was interested again in the development of young children and bringing that. And so I entered the doctoral program there. It took me, I say with some chagrin, almost 7 years to get this doctorate. And that was, commuting one night a week to College Park, taking 2 courses, coming home and with 4 children and working full time. So it took me a long time, but it finally got finished. And as I said, I felt that it did not play any havoc on my children because they saw me staying up studying and I had to do my homework and such. But there were many, many nights where I almost pulled all-nighters to prepare for my coursework and such. And I did my dissertation on self-esteem. And I used the children, well actually the subjects were the children from Lida Lee Tall. And we did a study on self-esteem at that time, and it was just fun to do and very, very effective program.
So what did your results tell us?
Well, it's interesting because I have always felt that children need to have positive reinforcement. They need to be told, you did a good job. And this was part of the study. There are many children who can't recognize that they did a good job. They get a spelling test back and they say, I got 6 wrong. But they don't say I got 15 right, And they had to recognize, and so we worked with them to help them recognize that they had lots of good qualities to say. Over the years, I think that we see where we need to be careful at the amount of reinforcement we give, the positive reinforcement, not to give it just because it needs to be, because it's said, but it needs to be said, and there needs to have then a connection there with the activity that the child has done and the reinforcement that's given.
And a bit of reality.
Yes.
In there too.
Yeah.
Because you don't always win.
But so often I cringe when I hear, and I hear this in public. I mean, I'm not confining this to a specific situation, but sometimes you hear it in the grocery store or on the street or in another store where a parent is belittling a child. That was stupid. Look what you're doing to your sister or whatever. And you wonder if that parent is doing that kind of interaction there in public with people around, then what might they be doing in their own home for this child? And people and children begin to form a picture of themselves from what others tell them. If you're told you're stupid, you're ugly, you can't do anything right, this is a picture that you begin to form of yourself. And these things, this must be true, my mother's telling me this, or my father's telling me this. So we need to be careful of that. I've done a lot of work with parents, because I think that, again, in early childhood, it all begins at home. There's so many things in the home that happen way before the child ever enters kindergarten. And these are the things we need parents to focus on, how they deal with their children, the kind of responses they give, the kind of language that they use, the kind of vocabulary that they build. And so I've done a lot of work with parents on this, not chiding them, but encouraging them. It's hard to be a parent. There's lots going on in the parents' lives, and again, I've been there. I've seen the work and the job and coming home and the homework and such. So parents need all the support that they can give, and I was fortunate that I had that support. Mm-hmm. But there are many parents who don't have that support, and that's important for parents. And sometimes when we look at a child in a classroom, this is something that teachers have to do. Think about this child coming to school without breakfast, or think about this child coming to school maybe having had a very bad morning before they ever get to the classroom, and think about that as their behavior.
One of the things that you started to do, and I believe this was when you were associate dean, but correct me if I'm wrong, was working, I guess, was with Maryland Public Television?
It was Baltimore County. Baltimore County Public Schools.
You were talking about
yes,
parents, and I think this is something that...
and again, this was such a wonderful experience. Baltimore County Public School began an educational channel when I was associate dean. And I thought about this educational channel and thought how wonderful to get to parents through this channel that would provide an opportunity then for parents to get some parenting skills prior to their children entering school. And so I wrote a proposal for Baltimore County, and they invited me to come in and speak to the superintendent and I sat around the table, again, in the hot summer, and I could just feel the perspiration coming down as I told them my idea, and I was like such a novice to this. And I said, if children will be better prepared if we can get to parents prior to their coming into the classrooms. And they thought it was a good idea, and they said, well, that sounds fine. Who would do it? And without a moment hesitation, I don't know why, I said, I'll do it. I can do it. And so it was called First Steps. First Steps were initiated. And again, I worked with just 2 other people. And they assured me that that was the way Barbara Walters started, but I didn't believe that at all. But I carried the equipment. We were we were at schools. We were, in the middle of the science center, wherever. But the purpose of the program was to help parents to develop skills, to develop ideas about parenting in a non-threatening way. And I had teachers, I had principals on the program. We did 32 half-hour programs.
Oh, heavens.
Those programs were then picked up through a national communications program, and they were marketed across the country. And they marketed and sold a number of the videos. And they're still, if you go on the website, it's interesting. They're still there, First Steps, and 32 of them. And the topics were helping children get through divorce, the importance of reading to your child, literacy, self-esteem. So we chose 32 topics, and I wrote them and worked with Lou Wehage from Baltimore County Public Schools. And then we had 2 camera people who went out with us, but we did that, and it's still, they're still out there. And most recently, Baltimore County Public Schools wanted to initiate another program for parents, and I was all excited. I thought it was going to be a revision of First Steps.
Mm-hmm.
It is not.
Oh.
It is more of a talking head program, but we are doing topics that are of interest to Baltimore County parents. And we've done 3 programs, one on assessment and one on summer activities. And I produce it and co-host it and write it and get the guests and whatever. So as soon as they get the new studio going in Baltimore County, then we'll be doing more of the programs for that. I just feel it's so important that parents have all of the help that they can in getting that, working with their children, because it begins there, begins at birth. And those years, the early years, I'm so happy that in my lifetime that I have seen that people begin to recognize the importance of the early years. Because I can remember when I first began teaching and told people that I was going to be, or that I was a kindergarten teacher, and they said, oh, well, you don't have to do anything. The kids play all day, don't they? You know, and that was the extent of what kindergarten teachers do. And now we realize that, you know, the first 4 years of life are so important, and the learning that occurs during that time, it's amazing. And as I said, I'm so pleased in my lifetime that people have begun to accept that and embrace that. No.
It's real important. Well, you departed Towson University in the position as Associate Dean, and what happened next?
Oh. Well, I really wasn't considering leaving Towson, but I had been at Towson for 32 years, starting with my days at Lida Lee Tall. And they went by so quickly. As I look back, you know, it was like a blink of an eye in terms of where did those 32 years go. At the time in my life, Towson had a program called the Peace Corps Fellows Program. And this was a program that was actually with the Peace Corps in Washington, Towson, and Baltimore City Public Schools. The program allowed returning Peace Corps volunteers to come to an underserved area, such as Baltimore City Public Schools, work in that area, and then get a master's degree with tuition reimbursement through the Peace Corps while they were doing this. And this national program of the Peace Corps was in Boston, New York, San Antonio, California, Georgia. It was all over the country. There were about 8 programs when we began. And the person who was the director of the program in Washington would come to Towson to observe the program, and I would be his host and show him what was going on and such. And one day he came and said, there's going to be a position open in the Peace Corps program in Washington as associate director of this program. And he was the director, and I absolutely loved him. He was just wonderful to work with, Henry Fernandez. And he said, how about applying for that job? And I said, oh, I don't think so. I mean, I've been here so long. He said, oh, and he really did paint this wonderful picture of Washington and the Peace Corps. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And at that time, my children were mostly adults. And I thought I could commute to Washington every day on the MARC train. And I did that for about 1.5 years. And then I said, forget this, I'll go there. And living in Washington was very exciting. But I took the job as Associate Director of the Peace Corps Fellows Program. And we expanded the program during that time, and it involved not only education in underserved areas, but health, because Johns Hopkins had a program, a fellow program, and also business. And we had a program at Pace University in New York, and that had the business part of it. But we expanded the program, I think, from 7 universities to something like 17 universities. And it's interesting because I've always been enamored, I guess because of Genevieve Hegney, of Teachers College Columbia. And they had a fellows program. And so I was hanging out at Teachers College Columbia frequently, and the person who was in charge of that program was just wonderful to work with and such. When Henry Fernandez left, I was appointed as director of the program. And because of my teacher education background, Mark Guerin, who was the director of the Peace Corps, was in the communication office, had been in the communication office with President Clinton, and he invited me to do training overseas. He said, how would you like to go overseas and do cross-cultural training for the volunteers overseas? And I said, I'd love to go, you know. So I went to places like Nepal and Kazakhstan and Tashkent and Romania and other places, and would go in for a short period of time. And this was the time when the volunteers were getting their initial training, go in and do a couple days of training, cross-cultural training. I lived close by, but I didn't live in the houses with the people, although I always had a volunteer as an escort. They were very, very insistent that I not travel on my own because they thought that they were concerned about that. And so I went in and did the training for them, and that was a wonderful experience. I remember one time when I was in Nepal, and I had this young man who was to be my escort, but I wanted to do some shopping before I left, and there was a little market right down from the little hotel where I stayed, and so I went down by myself and did that, and the director of the Peace Corps found out that I did this on my own, and I remember he said to me, the last thing I want to do is to tell Peace Corps that something happened to you. And I answered and said, nope, the last thing you want to do is to call my mother and tell her something happened to me. She would be furious with you. But they were wonderful experiences. I loved Nepal. It was absolutely wonderful, just wonderful.
Can't imagine.
Oh.
What an experience.
And the Peace Corps volunteers were just so gracious, and they're such nice, nice people, and just so dedicated. It was just wonderful to be around them and to see the work they're doing. And they insisted, you know, that I go out with them out into the field to meet some of the people. And so I had that opportunity to get out there and to actually meet the people. And, you know, I was just a plain old person, really, but, you know, oh, here's somebody from Washington, you know, that name in itself. And I thought, well, this sounds good. You know, I'll take advantage of this.
Sure.
So this is good. But Peace Corps has a time limit, unfortunately, on positions in D.C. There's a 5-year limit.
Really? And I didn't know that.
And as my time was coming to a close, Mark Guerin said to me one day, now, what are you going to be doing? And I said, oh, I'm going to go back to Baltimore. He said, no, 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 you can't go back to Baltimore. You have to stay here in Washington. And he said, what if I got you a job in the Department of Ed? And I said, oh, you're kidding. He said, no. He said, I think I can get you a presidential appointment in the Department of Ed. And I was just like, oh my golly, here it is again, Fran, you know? I mean, could anything get better? And so he did get me the appointment, and I worked for Secretary Riley. And, you know, I think, oh, that was the best job I ever had. No, this was the best job I ever had. But working for Secretary Riley was a fantastic, fantastic job.
And you were involved in?
America Reads, which took work-study students and placed them as part of their work responsibility in schools as tutors. But then my best part of the job was Secretary Riley was very, very interested in universal pre-kindergarten.
Ooh.
And so he said, okay, you need to go around the country talking this up to superintendents, to parents, to school board people about how great preschool is. And I said, that's my cup of tea. And so I did. But you know, the thing that surprised me was, you know, I had such enthusiasm for this, and so did Secretary Riley. But the thing that surprised me was that it was not 100% accepted. Mm. There were different views on this. Some people felt that we shouldn't begin schooling at that early an age. Some people felt that we were taking children away from their parents, you know. Mm-hmm. So not everybody jumped on the universal pre-kindergarten bandwagon, and as you know, it took years before that concept even caught on with that. But it was wonderful promoting it and having his blessing, you know, in promoting this. Yes. It was wonderful to work in that project. Mm-hmm. So, and when, unfortunately, when the administration then changed, I had to then leave the administration, leave the Department of Ed, and another job came into my lap, and that was with the PBS Ready to Learn. PBS in Alexandria had just received a grant from the State Department of Education to have children's programs work closely with education and learning. And Ready to Learn grants then came into existence, and I got a job with working with producers on content, working with the website, and doing professional development for programs around the country to help people in the local stations how to promote their programs and how to do Ready to Learn. And I think of all the jobs I ever had, this job with Ready to Learn, working with Clifford and Mr. Rogers and Elmo, in the eyes of my grandchildren, that was the best job you could ever have. My grandmother works with Clifford. She knows Clifford. And so that was, you know, to them, that put me up a level with that. I guess looking back over the past 57 years, I know that choosing education as a career path was the best choice I ever made. And it took me to many adventures, you know, many from the classroom to Nepal, all over the place. And as I said before, I look at the kindergarten, though, and say that's where it all began. And to this day, as I sit in the classroom and observe students teaching, I get a smile on my face when I'm in that kindergarten class and see them teaching young children. And I think, you know, in education, we really can make a difference in lives of children and youth and adults. And so this is the best career that somebody could choose.
Thank you, Fran.
You're welcome. Thank you.